views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. In 2019, BronxNet turned 25, and Bronx Talk, the borough's first television talk show, now considered the Bronx's flagship talk show, also celebrated 25 years. And in 2019, as in the previous 24 years, every week we had a new program about the Bronx, extending our grand total for the last quarter century to 1,223 programs. Tonight, we'll review some of our favorite shows of 2019. First up, in April, we presented both sides of the Morris Park road diet question. Should the city reconfigure a longtime Bronx commercial strip to add lanes for bicycles? The community resoundingly said no. On the other hand, Transportation Alternatives said yes. Both sides had their say on Bronx Talk. What is it about, and by the way, we're going to show you exactly what the thing is from this to, like from A to B. But what is it about this that really attracts you?
Okay, I mean, I'm going to say first that there are bicycle lanes here, but I'm not going to make Morris Park.
And you're an active biker?
I'm an active cyclist in the Bronx.
Okay.
I actually rode my bike 4,000 miles in the Bronx last year. That being said, I'm going to put the
that
bikes...
That must have been a very long day. I know we have a big borough.
Tour de Bronx was a good part of it,
Okay.
I'm going to put that aside for a second. This is not about the bike lanes to start. This is about making Morris Park Avenue safer for the pedestrians and the vehicles that have a free roam to use that wide road, and speed. So I would say that as the DOT comes in and wants to convert a road from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, that third lane in the center being a turn lane allows for an extra 5 feet of space between parking and the travel lane. And that's why the bike lane is there. Mm-hmm. Certainly, it's going to block people from double parking, or they're going to feel that way. But currently, they're doing that anyway in that second travel lane,
right?
Unmarked travel lane.
You, community board, and other groups, the local council member and others say it's not a good idea. Why do you think?
No, first of all, I get upset when people say that it's a safety issue. I live in Morris Park. My family was brought up in Morris Park. Members of the community associations live in Morris Park. You think they want their children hurt?
I was going to say, none of us want to see anybody get hurt.
But the thing is, with the bike lanes, what's going to happen with the bike lanes, the narrowing of Morris Park, first of all, our businesses are going to be hurt big time. Big Deal Supermarket gets 250 deliveries a week. Window King, which gets a delivery that takes 5 hours to unload his windows, he's basically going to go out of business.
Why? Because there's not going to be room.
Because there'll be a truck area for parking, but that will be by Big Deal. That's where they have the loading dock.
But not. That's where the loading dock.
So he's 3 blocks away.
Now where do they do it now? So now they would double park.
They still double park.
Kevin's going. Aha. Each May, the Bronx inducts a new class into the Bronx Walk of Fame. This year's honorees included former boxing champ Iran Barkley. He's an effervescent personality who still lives in the borough of the Bronx. Barkley appeared on Bronx Talk on May 13th. In addition to reminiscing about his championships, Barkley talked about how fighting in the ring has taught him life lessons. Just talk to me about what it's like to be a champion and then all of a sudden be, as the documentary shows, sleeping on the number 6 train.
I mean, let me tell you, first of all, God's been good to me. But even though I went through the things I went through, I still bounced back. You know what I'm saying? I look at things like that, being a champion and everything, and standing up to people and fighting my way to the top, you know, and not getting what I really supposed to have because it's 4 other guys ahead of me. You know, you had Tommy Hearns, Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, and Roberto Duran. So I got to fight 2 of the guys. And, you know, Duran was a tough fight, and it was a hard road to climb, but it gave me great respect. And it was a great thing. I fought Tommy, which was even more better, you know.
And that's when you won the championship.
That's when I won the light heavyweight championship.
That's right.
Where nobody thought I wasn't gonna beat him.
So does it bother you that it is a documentary that had to name you the 5th king? Does that bother you? Or at this point you look back and you say, you know what, that's fine?
No, it don't bother me because when you say the 5th king, I chose that for myself.
There you
You
go.
know what I'm saying? I know that I was the 5th king. You know what I'm saying? And Aaron wouldn't recognize that for me. So I said, you know, there's no problem.
Do you think you were talking about what it takes to bounce back and to live the life that you've led? Do you think the nature of being a boxer helps you through that? Because, I mean, you're fighting. I mean, as opposed to pitching a baseball or hitting a tennis ball, you really got to fight. Do you think that helps you in life and helps you rebound from something as difficult as what you went through?
Oh, definitely. I mean, because I came from the bottom and went to the top and came back down to the in-between. You know what I'm saying? And still fighting the battle to come ahead.
Right now, you feel, we were talking before the show, and you feel good. You're doing okay. You live in the hybrid section of the Bronx, and you started out with a very optimistic outlook. So nobody should feel bad for Iran Barkley. Is that what I feel bad?
Nah, you shouldn't feel bad for me. You should feel happy. You know what I'm saying? Because Iran Barkley is still here. He's alive. He's well. He's happy. He put everything behind him and got himself together.
And the last thing before we bring your documentary producer in, it must be about the greatest honor you could have to be a Bronx guy, to grow up in the Bronx, to be a champion in the Bronx, to still live in the Bronx, and then to know that you're going to be honored by the Bronx and the Bronx Walk of Fame.
I mean, that's a lifetime dream come true. You know, I said one day, I used to tell my best friend, I say, I'm gonna own this corner right here. I'm gonna be here, my name gonna be up there, and like, you know, as kids, guys go, you crazy, you know what I'm saying? Well, the craziest thing now, we all grown, we all older, and they said, you know something, Iran? You remember when you said you was gonna have your name up on the street?
Yeah.
Now, boom, you know?
Unfortunately, in 2019, there was a disturbing rash of police suicides. In July, right after a 50th precinct officer took his own life, we brought in a former NYPD lieutenant and a mental health professional to talk about how to prevent these tragedies from taking the lives of New York's finest in the future. They had some interesting suggestions. I think about police officers that I see, and when something happens in the street and they say, hey, somebody ran by with a gun or whatever it is, what's the first thing you do? You say you call a cop. And then here's a police officer who may or may not be a family person, man or woman, who comes in and then sees a child who got shot. Is there a way to divorce yourself and kind of, protect yourself from that emotional moment of knowing, hey, I have kids, I have a family, I care about people, that's why I got this job in the first place, and yet I'm looking at just the most horrible scene I've ever seen. I mean, is there a way to train a police officer to divorce themselves from being affected?
Well, counseling, I believe, would be the sustainment piece. It should be an ongoing process. Right, whereas I think officers should meet with a therapist maybe once to twice a year, just to assess where that individual is. But the problem is we have the labor issues, whereas if an officer is perceived as unfit, then the labor unions would then interdict and say, hey, look, this is unfair, the officer's being unnecessarily criticized, and they're being taken offline. It's it's a tough stretch.
Let's bring Dr. Friedman into the conversation. Clearly, people under immense pressure. I guess it would be akin on some level to seeing soldiers who come back with PTSD and they have lingering dreams and issues. How do you deal with it? Before we even get to the suicide piece, how do you deal and what is the appropriate way to address people who go through these things literally on a daily basis?
So I think that you have to look at it from both a macro and a micro level. I think the macro level is probably the most important piece, and that is until we really tackle the idea that needing to talk to someone after witnessing something as horrific as a murder of a child is normal. To need to speak to them, that's normal. To not be given the opportunity to do that is actually not a normal thing. And so, you know, I applaud you for having us here because it gives me an opportunity to let people know that actually I would be concerned about you if you didn't have a reaction.
To talk to or have
A reaction. And so what I would love to see, and we would certainly be happy to partner and facilitate helping partner other community agencies, it has to be embedded in the system. Having folks in the precinct is great, but there's still such a stigma because when you use the word weakness, if you see that phenomena as weakness, then
perceived weakness.
Yes, then you're not going to seek the help. And so we have to reframe it. It's actually healthy to have a reaction to something that's so horrific. And then to get that support, you can go back out there and try to prevent it.
You know, what you say, I never occurred to me. And so if God forbid I or you or anybody I know or was close to witnessed something like that, when they, after they called the police,
Yeah.
and then they came out of it, you would hug that person and you would look at that person and you would say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry you had to see that. You know, it's just a horrible thing. You know, do you need some help? Do you want to have a drink? Do you want to go have a dinner? You want to talk to somebody? And you would deal with it. But a police officer will see that, and as Dr. Porcher said, that police officer will go to 3 different events in the same day, one
Right.
after the other, and potentially it'll be just part of the job and nobody will address that.
Right.
Right?
And so one of the other
Wow.
ways,
It never occurred to me that that's where we were going. Fascinating.
one of the other ways to sort of support the force, the police force, is to involve the families.
Their families.
Their families. No one is more invested in the wellness of those officers than the spouse and the extended family.
Wow.
And so one of the ways to approach this is to engage on a community level the families of those folks and provide supports to them.
2019 will go down in history as a year of highly charged politics across the nation. In September, we sat down for an in-depth discussion about a range of issues with Democrat Eliot Engel, who talked not only about his party and politics, but also about a pressing international issue. If you look at Congress as a whole, maybe your record on Israel is probably as strong as anybody's in terms of the support for Israel. It was interesting that you, who've been, as I say, Israel's biggest champion in the House, were pretty strong in your condemnation of the president and reaching out to Netanyahu, and then, of course, ultimately the Israeli government banning the Ocasio-Cortez, Omar Presley, and Tlaib from visiting Israel. Why did you do that? What were your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, there's no one in Congress through the past years that has been a stronger supporter of Israel than me. I've been on the Foreign Affairs Committee from the time I was first in Congress, which was 30 years ago. Now I'm the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I've been the strongest supporter of Israel in the Congress. And I still am, and I always will be, because I believe the Jewish people, like other people, deserve a state of their own. By the way, I'm for a 2-state solution. I think that's the way to get out of this mess. A state for the Jewish state of Israel, and next to it a Palestinian democratic state with no access to terrorism or weapons, or there are things that can be worked out. I just think that by not allowing a member of the United States Congress to come visit, it was a terrible mistake, because I would like people to come visit Israel. It's the only democracy in the Middle East.
Even if their views are diametrically opposed to yours on Israel, you think it's okay for them to visit?
Well, yeah, I do. I think it proves the fact that what friends of Israel like myself have been saying, that there's only one democracy in the Middle East, it's Israel, that the Jewish people have a right to a state, that this BDS movement is a horrific, terrible movement, and that the attempts to ostracize Israel are attempts that should be met with resistance, because I think that Israel has a lot to offer, and I think that one of the things Israel has to offer is free speech. So if there's someone who comes and visits that doesn't agree with the government, it would show the world that in Israel you could disagree with the government and still be allowed to come. So I think it was a tactical mistake, and I said so.
Are you in sync with how President Trump has handled Israel? He allowed the capital to be moved to Jerusalem. He has a very strong bond, obviously, with Netanyahu, who is an ultra-conservative, much like Trump is. It certainly seems that Israel sees American politics the way that Trump does, with a dislike of Democrats. So talk to me about where Trump is at as far as Israel as in relation to what you think.
Well, what Trump tries to do with Israel, which I don't like, is he tries to make it into a political football. He wants to use Israel as a political football. I don't want to use Israel as a political football. The president may want to show in his mind that he thinks Republicans are better than Democrats on Israel, but I reject that. 80% or 75% of Jewish American voters vote Democratic. So there's a strong sense of social justice in Jewish people's attitudes, and that has always translated into strong support for the Democratic Party. The president's done some good things. I agreed with the moving of the capital to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. It's the eternal capital of Israel. And I think it's very important that that stayed. And the president has done some other things with which I agree. But the attempt to turn Israel into a political football is not something that I think we should be doing. It's not something that benefits Israel.
You did not support the nuclear deal with Iran. The French are now talking about renegotiating that deal. As you know, as you well know, Israel was not in favor of the deal. How do you see it now that the deal is done and we are at loggerheads with Iran? Maybe the deal was something that kept more peace in the region than we had had. Looking back, do you say, you know what, maybe it wasn't such a bad thing?
No, I'm not against a deal with Iran. In fact, I'm for a deal with Iran, but I wasn't for that deal.
Last month, it was announced that Nike was not going to license merchandise sales at the iconic Yankee shops on River Avenue. That would put 8 of them out of business. Ultimately, the mega corporation recanted, and the Bronx stores will be good to go for the 2020 baseball season. On November 18th, BronxTalk got all the details of what went down and how those Bronx businesses were saved. Dr. Goodman, let's start with you. Give us the story. You told me off camera and prior exactly what had happened. Mm-hmm. So they cut this deal, and then what happened? How did this iconic street get left out of a deal between Major League Baseball and Nike?
Well, this iconic street, like much of the Bronx, gets left out of a lot of stuff. But what happened...
Oh, I like his attitude already.
What happened here was that an email was sent to the merchants advising them that starting in January, they no longer were going to have Yankee jerseys, named T-shirts, and the kind of stuff that is the core of their economy. And I guess it was at the street fair that Councilwoman and I discussed it and walked over and spoke with one of the key owners and said, hey, we want to do something to help you with this. So we started the process of reaching out to Nike. It took a few weeks calling out to the West Coast to identify someone out there, who in turn passed the ball over to the New York rep in for Nike.
Second base, is that the proper metaphor?
That's very good. And it was Labor Day that she came out to
I didn't realize
the
it was that far back.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we've been working on this for a while.
Wow, fascinating.
So Labor Day, she came up to visit, and she met with the store owners. She saw how these owners had invested in improving their storefronts and making it a really, as you put it, a Yankee experience to go in there. And nonetheless, when she reported back to the West Coast, the answer came that, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to provide them with this merchandise, meaning they're going under.
I got to tell you, I don't, even from a business perspective, I mean, I don't want to look at necessarily bottom lines, how much business they do, but the New York Yankees selling Yankee, it's the most, you came in wearing a Yankee logo, it's the most famous logo in sports, it's maybe the most historic logo,
Right.
and you have businesses that are, man, do you ever try to get in one of those stores before or after a game?
Right, they're packed, yeah.
And so they turned it down.
So they were talking, and I think...
And do we know why?
They said that they were only going to operate out of premium distribution points, and what this meant for them was you could buy these jerseys and T-shirts and sweatshirts inside the ballpark, or you could buy them directly through Nike. In fact, Nike even cut Amazon out. Next year,
I mean,
right? You're
that
only going
competition is like Yankees Red Sox. I get that,
But anyway, the only way you could buy anything then is going to be direct to the consumer. So they're moving in a direction where everything, or pretty close to it, would either be online or through the chain stores.
Let me bring the council member in, but there really are so many implications, and frankly, not only for the Bronx, which of course is what we're talking about. I mean, I'm thinking you go outside Fenway Park or Wrigley Field or Camden Yards, everybody's selling this stuff. What was your reaction? I assume you were like, wait a minute, this just can't be, right?
So at that street fair that Dr. Goodman is talking about, it was the late summer before Labor Day. And at first, I didn't realize the magnitude of what he was saying when the businesses received the first email.
It seems inconceivable.
It almost seemed, unbelievable. And I said, are you sure? Like, why would that happen? And then as we started to research what was going on between Nike and Major League Baseball and this new merchandise agreement, we started to realize that we have these two corporate entities that are making decisions at a corporate level, but not really understanding what's happening at a Bronx level as it relates to our local merchants. And we understood the history of our Bronx businesses, the value, the fabric, the foundation. Over 100 Bronx residents employed to date. Generational businesses from as early back as the 1930s.
Right.
And so we wanted Nike and MLB to understand that Bronx local businesses are important to us. And so that started a series of emails and communication. We used social media, and we started to really draw attention to this merchandise agreement and the negative impact it would have on a local basis.
And as I understand it, and Dr. Goodman, frankly, kept me blow by blow as this was unfolding toward the end. Eventually, the Yankees came up to bat, and they entered into it. They have really tried their best, I know, especially through the process of building the stadium, to work with the Bronx and work with Carrie and the Bronx leaders. They eventually came in and said, you know what, we really going to support our Bronx people, right?
Credit the council member.
We alerted Brian Smith, the vice president at the Yankee organization.
That will do it for our look backwards at 2019. I want to thank all the people who have appeared on the program this year. Also, our executive director, Michael Max Nobby, who is our biggest supporter. And also to the outstanding young people who work in the studio with us to make sure we look good every week. Also, of course, special thanks to our producer, Helen Greenberg, our director, Nick Marrero. But mostly, though, we thank you, the people of the Bronx, who make us tick every single week. Let's make the beautiful Bronx even more beautiful in 2020, and we'll see you next week. Good night.